3 pieces of setup before I start the 2 arguments from side proposition. First, what is our goal? Our goal is to expand influence of the opposition party in a predominantly in a world where predominant political party exists. But second, if we're able to expand the influence, we think that there will be more pressure upon the predominant political party, which will ultimately pressure them into making better decisions, into making like better policy in general. But third, what do we defend and what do we oppose? What we defend on side proposition is things like Japan, where Kokumin Minshito has like specific discourses around tax policy, and it is like specific political campaign that focuses around talking about specific policies, such as Mr. Tamaki, where like he talks about concessions and like specifically the Democrats talking about specific political decisions. But what we oppose is Rikken Minshito in Japan, where there are generally this antagonistic surrounding and like antagonistic idea where they will criticize the parties for like Sakura saying or their behaviors instead of actually talking about what they focus on, what their policy is, and why don't they agree with particular political policies, and they just call out on the personal lives of other parties. 2 arguments from side proposition then. First, why is this a bad strategy? And second, why is our side much better? First, why this is a bad strategy. The thesis is that by having this like specific discourse is that you're antagonizing the character, the moral character of the opposition party. Ultimately, what you're doing is wasting more resources, and you like only created a world where there is like less often available. So the first layer of this argument is that there are endless cycle of moral campaign that happens on their side of the house. This is because moral campaign is always going to be easier than talking about specific policies and the political discourses that happens on our side of the house. This is because instead of investments and actually seeing the outcomes of investing things in like building more hospitals or having better political structure in healthcare, ultimately you can just say that and you can just like invest in things like discovering someone is like extremely racist and just say that they're racist, and this ends your political campaign, this ends your attack, and ultimately we think that on a balance it requires you to spend less resources into actually discovering these things rather than to have the fulfillment into investing in actual policies, right? But we also think that the consequence of this action is that you only garner gossipy voters, and ultimately you drive away enthusiastic voter base, which will walk out away on you. So not only do you undermine the intelligent voter base from yourself and from the general political atmosphere, but we also think that ultimately you undermine the legitimacy of your campaign and the legitimacy of your action. But the second layer to this argument is that time and resources are ultimately being wasted in this process. For example, we think that by like researching or analyzing things in like how do we improve negative interest rate, how do we improve profit, and how do we better the economic structure of the country, we generally get on their side of the house like things like moral attacks that only focuses on someone being racist or someone like not using a lot of like time and effort into ultimately like bettering the country in general. But we think that what is important is the statistical analysis and correlation and coordination within the party that is able to happen with that wasted resources. And we think the result is that on their side, you get less informed decisions because you also drive away bad actors with good ideas. What this means is, for example, like a few years ago in America, where there is Sarah Palin, her daughter, she was supporting of the Republican Party, and she was also an feminist advocacy, but ultimately what was found out was that her daughter underwent abortion, and that undermined her entire political campaign and what she advocated upon. We think that in this specific case, like this is first not related to her, but we think that second, you lose out on the kind of political advocacy that you're able to get when, in our case, you still value her ideas and you still value her policies that are made on our side. But the third layer to this argument is that if you overly focus upon the moral character of one political candidate, it means that ultimately when the political party changes the candidate, your entire campaign falls, because the moral character that only focuses on that political candidate only targets a specific individual. So what you get is that your entire political candidacy is so reliant on one individual instead of ultimately targeting the entire party in general. The second argument from side proposition is why our policy is better. The thesis is that you get easier mechanism that garners voter bases, and we think that ultimately this creates a better political atmosphere. 4 layers in this argument. A, we get wider ranges of voters. So we always think that voters exist on a spectrum, which means that they make issues by issues. So for example, if you have like a socially conservative person, but an economic liberal person, it likely means that you don't belong to either side of the party and you only decide upon specific issues, such as you want liberal economic policies, but you also want socially conservative policies that are set. We think that in this case, it makes it so much easier for these voters on our side to decide and to actually garner their vote. But B, we think that it becomes more accessible for opt-in mechanism and lower literacy voters. What this looks like is, on Twitter, such as when you see specific political candidates talking about specific issues, it makes it easier for lower literacy voters to understand like what exactly they want. Instead of on a wider political atmosphere, when you have to focus on the moral character, you have to dig in a lot in order to find out what the party is about and what they support. But C, we think that it is also easier for call-out mechanism for voters to happen in our case. This means that if a specific political candidate is unable to fulfill a certain policy that they advocated for, such as like not being able to like raise the interest rate, not being able to put in like the to like make economic succession happen, we think that it is much easier for voters to see that and actually call them out on that. But finally, we think that decisions with ruling parties is necessary, and this only happens on our case, where instead of the moral character, we think that things like, for example, handling natural disasters or COVID, collaboration is feasible and more easier to occur on our side. Because of that, proud to propose.
Did you run second argument, third layer?
Second argument, third layer?
Yeah, ちょっと待って。
どれだろう。
結局何言うのか。Second argument, third layer.
Largely democratic countries, ensuring that good policies exist is something that's being already done, from the fact that there are journalists, investigative journalists, and different factions within that majority political party, right? So what we are proposing is that the uniqueness of what the opposition parties within these democratic countries, what they uniquely can do is that they can actually ensure accountability that does not exist in a world in which the opposition party focuses solely on ensuring better policies or focusing on policies. That is the world that we are trying to push today, so proud to propose. My points for today is one, how we are able to ensure better accountability, and second, well, we'll still be able to ensure good policies on our side, right? But before that, let me go into a few refutations. Firstly, the government side talked about how bad politicians with good ideas will be kicked out, and they brought up this example of a woman who had abortion but she had good economic policies, right? But let us say that one, this is symmetrical on either sides of the house. We think that stuff like abortion is bad. We think that those are ideologies that are deeply ingrained within society at the point in which people will agree to, opposition party campaigns that push for this kind of thing, right? So you think that on either side, we think that even without these opposition parties trying to push that, people will still be largely unwilling to support people who have had abortions if abortion is so against that agenda, right? So you think that this is largely symmetrical. And we think that rather too, what on our side, what we can uniquely provide is the uncovering of stuff like corruption that isn't available to the public eye as of now, because stuff like corruption can only be figured out by people who are within politics in the status quo, and that I'll be explaining this later in my speech. Secondly, they talked about how people will be more incentivized to look into the policies and then thus become more interested in politics or be able to make better decisions about politics. I'll take it later. We think that this is also pretty symmetrical at the point in which education exists. People are still pretty much engaged in politics. And secondly, we think that even if they are not engaged, this is not important, right? Because these dominant political parties are dominant for a reason. They basically reflect the general interest of the people already, right? Such insofar as they provide better employment opportunities, which is why people have historically voted for them again and again. So you think that people's interest in politics is not really that important at the point in which these dominant political parties are already providing them with a good life, and these dominant political parties are incentivized to provide them with a good life.
Point.
But with that, let me go into my framing. Sorry, no time. So I have three pieces of framing here. Firstly, what do these dominant political parties look like? We think that these dominant political parties look like Jiminto in Japan, right? And we think that many people support them, and they have majority support already because what these political parties introduce to them are something that's very like on a utilitarian scale, it's very beneficial to them in that they provide them with good employment opportunities and good economic opportunities, right? And we think that we think that even within these dominant political parties, they have many different factions, and they're very different factions providing different kinds of aspects and different policies.
Point.
Secondly, what do these morals look like? We think that stuff like morals actually speaks to humans, right? From when we are very young, we are ingrained with morals from stuff like Disney movies or moral education. Stuff like killing humans is wrong or scamming others is wrong. These are all morals that inherently speak to us as human beings, no matter what thing you believe in. Thirdly, what does a functioning democracy look like? We think that in a functioning democracy, A, we have a right to thought and media is very free, and B, the dominant party is largely representative of what the people think. With that, let me go into my first point about better accountability. So, our thesis is that opposition parties ensure accountability. Why is this the reason? Three reasons. Firstly, they have an incentive to try to bring up their side by trying to advertise themselves as being being moral, right?
Point.
So in order to do so, they'll try to bring down the morals of the other side. So they'll try to point out flaws in the other side's political campaigns by saying, oh, it's immoral, they don't have integrity, they don't have transparency. And they have more of an incentive to actually point out these flaws and try to actively go out searching for these flaws. Let us also preempt the other side's argument by saying that these flaws will be largely based on truth, right? We think that these dominant political parties that they'll be criticizing are dominant and they have a large supporter base. So we think that at the point in which they're dominant, we think that these opposition parties will not take such a huge risk as to point out as to make up inherently false narratives, because that will only be harmful to them.
Point.
No, thank you. Secondly, we think that these opposition parties have the capacity to point out flaws in the other side's party. Why is this so? This is because opposition parties are already within the government to some extent. They are politicians. They are making laws or trying to get laws made alongside the dominant party. What that means is that they are more proximate to the dominant party insofar as they
Point.
know. No, thank you. If the dominant party is doing something wrong or is doing something that's not transparent. Thirdly, we think that because of this, they have, using their political campaigns, they have this incentive to try to broadcast that into the public. So, onto my second layer of analysis. So why will people who support this dominant party so much be, persuaded by this accountability narrative, right? We think that this is because of the framing that we provided you. Morals and immoral acts inherently speak to you as a human being, right? We think that even if you support the policies of a majority party, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to support the morals that they abide by. If you want more transparency, we think that people will protest for more transparency. They might not oppose the dominant party, but they will protest for better policies, right? So you think that the impact of this is simple. The dominant party will try to change their policies because they still want the majority support, right? This looks like trying to improve initiatives on transparency. This looks like trying to get rid of corruption. This looks like trying to listen and not trying to oppress the voices of opposition parties. We think that on that comparative, they literally have no accountability because even though there are different factions within the government, at the point in which the different factions need the support of the majority in order to be the majority in the first place, they won't be likely to do something as harmful to that political campaign. Secondly, there is stuff like investigative journalism, but we think that that simply does not work because it takes years for them to actually be able to make connections and go into politics. So I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Let's invite DPM.
Alright, pronouns are he, him. We'll take maximum probably 3 POIs from all. Okay, everyone ready? Starting. 3, 2, 1. I can't win this debate by calling my 3 friends in opposition a group of racists who are morally wrong. Because we value discourse, we value perception, and we value better policy. And for that, we stand on proposition. I'm going to do one most important clarification at the top of my speech before getting into any other material. I don't think that there's one correct policy, or there is no one correct political party, and there is no one correct idea that we all must stand by. We develop policy and ideas and generate these ideas and decide these ideas through societal discourse, through the process of voting, through opposition parties saying, I think that's not correct. That's the only way we can develop better policies that actually advantage individuals. The entire opposition claim stands on one premise, that the dominant party is dominant purely because they have the best policy and for no other reason. I have 4 reasons why the dominant party is dominant, other than the fact that they have better policy. Number 1, dominant parties oftentimes have the most funding. Number 2, dominant parties have the capacity to draw lines, which allows for things like gerrymandering. Number 3, dominant parties have the capacity to use propaganda through state media to coerce voters to vote for them. Look at countries like Singapore. Number 4, there's a lot of ingrained beliefs in what a dominant political party should be. It's very hard to vote against the People's Party in Japan. What the implication of all of this then is that the assumption that the dominant party is dominant because they have the correct policy, or the assumption that the dominant party has the capacity to choose the best policy for all individuals is a wrong one. This fundamentally goes against everything democracy stands for. They should defend an autocracy then. Autocracies can make decisions. The reason why we prefer democracies in the vast majority of society is because this allows for the representation of beliefs, it allows for societal changes, and it allows for the people on the ground to make the best decisions, not the politicians in one dominant party. With that said, then, let me first defend our case before attacking theirs. Our case from first speaker was very, very simple. We think that attacks against character is generally a bad strategy as it comes from an opposition political party. We gave you 3 reasons. Number 1, we tell you that this leads to an endless vicious cycle in campaigning, which leads to a lot of things like resources and time wasted on irrelevant personal ideals that doesn't allow for the majority of the voter base who cares about actual policy. That calling somebody a racist idiot is not something that is easy for an individual to opt into. We tell you number 2, that resources are zero sum. At the point in which they're wasting a lot of money on investigations into individuals in the majoritarian political party, that is at the point in which they can spend less resources on things like policy investigation, analysis into the actual policies dominant parties are doing, and campaigning in regards to what the political beliefs of the opposition party actually are. Number 3, that this leads to good ideas by bad actors being disregarded. That, for example, Trump has very legitimate political ideas that ought to be implemented for a better America, but are simply disregarded because of other morally heinous acts that Trump may or may not have committed. Our abortion example was mistook by opposition. Sarah Palin's opinions were disregarded just because her daughter did something that was against the political beliefs of her party. We think it is wrong that an individual's ideas are disregarded for irrelevant, morally heinous acts or some acts that opposition doesn't like. Our second argumentation was that on the flip then, we believe that attacks against the political ideas of the dominant party is a much more effective campaigning strategy to garner support for the opposition party. We give you, again, 3 reasons. Number 1, we tell you that this allows you to appeal for a much wider voter base. The majority of individuals aren't tied to a political preference. Some are socially conservative and economically liberal. What that means is I can appeal to these voters through actual policy decisions rather than attacking the character of an entire political party. We tell you, number 2, that this leads to more informed decisions by voters. That as a poor individual, it's much more harder for me to buy into, Trump dumb ideology than it is to opt into, we give money to the poor, or we give universal medical care for the poor. That is a much more ideal idea that I can buy into as, for example, an impoverished individual. We tell you, number 3, another unengaged mechanism from our first speaker, that collaboration and negotiation and compromise is the foundations of democracy to even exist. That is how our society functions. And when we antagonize political parties through attacking the fundamental individuals rather than the beliefs of the party, that is at the point in which collaboration becomes much harder. The implication of all of this is that we strengthen the opposition party, which allows for accountability, not in the individuals, but the actions and the policies of the political party. That is the accountability we hear about on a proposition. Before moving to individual accountability, any POIs? Great. Individual accountability then. I have 3 main blunts of argument responses against opposition analysis. Number 1, the analysis coming from opposition is categorically untrue. That you need power to use accountability. On opposition, we prove to you that the opposition party likely doesn't have enough power to enact a lot of the policies or ideas that they want. The implication then is that there is no accountability to be created when you have no force to use accountability to. That when I don't have any power in this room, I can't tell them to do something. I can't kick out somebody from their team just because somebody did something bad. Therefore, our argumentation stands as a premise for the argumentation even standing. Number 2, you have your last chance to do any POIs. Cool. Number 2, on mitigation. That their claim is that there won't be any falsehoods because of the silver bullet on they won't risk it. But what are they really risking on opposition, right? They have no power. They have nothing to risk. Why wouldn't I risk it? If I have no power as an opposition party, I'm going to make some shit up about the other party just so I can have a chance of getting some more power, right? I won't risk it. Doesn't matter when you have nothing to risk. Third, and finally, and the most important thing in regards to the argumentation, that we don't care about this. We have investigative journalists. We have Shukan Bunshi that care about investigative journalism. We have other accountability mechanisms. The crucial comparative on our side then is that we don't waste millions of dollars into journalism that other individuals can do. We don't waste important monetary funds that we should be using on creating better policy on random shit that anybody else can do. Their entire introduction is about the power of investigative journalists. We stand by investigative journalists doing any necessary important investigations into the character of individuals. On a proposition, we fundamentally believe that democracy ought to be founded upon discourse and better ideas, and for that, proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Keio, for that speech. Let's invite Keio.
3 things in my speech. Firstly, rebuttal to the reconstruction. Secondly, flip the goal of government on the fact that opposition parties get more votes while introducing our second point. And thirdly, explain why, even if opposition parties don't have more seats in our world, it's okay. Now, firstly, on to rebuttals. Let's first, I have 4 points here. Firstly, on that there's no one correct political party, and the reason why the big political parties even have seats in the first place. Now, firstly, let's talk about why big parties will have a lot of seats in the first place. They said that there's going to be they'll be able to gerrymander, there's going to be a corruption within the media, there's going to be more lines because of people. But we firstly think that it's going to be we are debating in a functioning democracy. I think their case on the fact that it goes against what democracy stands for is supporting our case, because in the first place, this is a functioning democracy. I think there's non-biased media, there's going to be equal funding, there's going to be equal gerrymandering in both worlds. But secondly, we flip this argument. We say, no, thank you. We flip this argument on the fact that there's no one crack political party. We say that when there's no one crack policy, there'll be different ideas within parties, right? This looks like even within Jiminto, there's different factions where they will talk more about policies, and I think that is going to be symmetrical to a world with opposition parties. But I think it's going to be a lot more efficient even within opposition parties because in that those people are going to be able to make policies within the party, and therefore that's going to be more effective. Second point of rebuttal, on that it wastes times on campaigning regards good policies by people. I don't think in the first place that disregarding good policies by bad people is going to be likely in the first place, because I think most people are going to look at policies in the first place. If people are going to waste their time going to vote, I think they're most likely going to look at the policies more than what they actually stand for. Secondly, if the taking their mechanization on the fact that the best political parties are standing there because they have so much funding, because there's media control, I think it's going to be okay even if they are bad people, because in the end that's going to be covered up. Third point of rebuttal on opposition parties and the government collaborating on what is good. We say firstly that is a functioning democracy. In the first place, I think they are going to collaborate. But secondly, if the policies are going to be so good, as they have explained in their oath, no thank you, that if the policies are going to be so good, why won't government just take those, try to take in the voices of opposition, right? I think that if all of the mechanization that stands in government world happens, if they're able to make such good policies that everyone agrees on, I think that would be very likely in our world too that government is also going to take these policies. This also goes against their point on how opposition parties won't have power. We have two rebuttals. We have two cases. Firstly, that they're already politicians, right? They already hold seats of power. They get loads of funding. I think they're already going to have power. But secondly, because they're going to be collaborating with the government, I think they're going to have a lot of power. Yeah.
The only benefit your branch brings is accountability. If internal division exists within a party, then isn't there accountability within the party?
I think there's going to be an incentive within because obviously political party, the biggest political party, wants to keep on power. I think there's a bigger incentive on your side to actually cover up these things. While on our side, there's no incentive for these big political parties to keep to cover up anything, because in the first place, they actually want the other party to fail. Now let's introduce our second point while flipping their main goal. Our point is on values and democracy and how they're going to be very similar in society as a whole. We think that the values of people within democracies is going to be similar because of three things. Firstly, obviously they have the same fundamental values, right? That looks like human rights. First speakers already talked about it, but it's also going to be stuff like corruption is wrong. I think we are told from a young age that stealing is wrong. I think corruption is going to be very similar to that. People fundamentally know between a lot of right and wrong, and I think that is going to lead to a lot of people thinking, hey, we shouldn't invade a random country just because we want more money. Secondly, that because because these ruling parties have so much control within politics, I think that is also going to lead to a shift within societal standards, leading to a change in everyone actually believing within that party more. But thirdly, that parties tend to become centralized. I think we're going to flip their case on their side, how within the government can get more seats of opposition. That even if opposition gets more seats, it doesn't matter. There's going to be 2 points of analysis on why parties become centralized. Firstly, that if parties want to get seats, parties want to get seats, I think they need to get the support of the centralized people. I think there's a lot of voters within the center because of 2 points. Firstly, on societal norms. I think a lot of people want a balance between 2 different parties, and I think that is going to lead to focus on the centralized people. But secondly, that people are going to want to be the same as everyone else. I think that doesn't need any explanation. Secondly, the parties are made up of ordinary people, right? So if the societal values, I think, are going to be implemented within those political parties, and even if there are going to be slight differences within parties, I don't think it's going to be that big. The impact of this is twofold: that any impact that government gets is going to be mitigated in any world. But secondly, since there's no uncovering of corruption, I'm going to explain how there's still standards in our world. There's going to be no benefits on their side. Now let's move on to my point about how it's okay if the majority keeps power. What does the majority look like? 2 points. Firstly, that they generally have very supportive policies. Firstly, in the first place, they have a majority, right? We've already explained to you this is a functioning democracy. I think they're going to be able to have good policies. But secondly, they have an incentive to remain dominant, and therefore they're probably going to keep good policies because this is a functioning democracy. They can't gerrymander, they can't get the media in to play with them. But secondly, that they have different factions within policies. Why is this the case? Because firstly, if it's going to be a very dominant party, I think it's the only source for a lot of people wanting to go within politics, right? For example, look at Jiminto. If you want to become an elected politician, I think the easiest way for you to go within politics is going to go through Jiminto. Therefore, even if people have different politics, I think it's most likely that they're going to join one very dominant party and try to make find their own policies during that. So why would the majority make good policies? 2 points. Why would our side have good policies? 2 points. Firstly, on the integrity of parties. I'm going to flip their point on how there's going to be an integrity of the individual. Firstly, we think that parties are made up of individual voters. So I think that even if there's going to be politicians that are going to not support abortion but then take an abortion, I think if those people are within a political party, I don't think there's any reason that people should support them. But secondly, people aren't going to abandon a party just because of some gossip, because the majority is probably going to be largely supported. Secondly, that there's going to be secondly, that even if opposition party gets more votes, I think in our world, there's going to be in any world, our world is going to be better. Therefore, they're part of those.
Thinking about speech, let's invite government questions.
I don't have the last 4 minutes. Libra 大丈夫？You want me? We can change it.
Well, I want to answer 2 questions in this debate. First of all, can we achieve accountability with their antagonistic moral attack strategy? On the second level, what is the efficacy of a policy-focused strategy for increasing voter base? On the first level, can we achieve what degree of accountability can we achieve by resorting to their antagonistic strategy? 4 things here. First of all, about weighing. In order for any opposition party to seek accountability, they first need to win the election in Congress. They need to get larger seats in Congress and Parliament. If we win election, then we can seek better accountability. So the timeline is different. Our primary priority is to get voter base and win election. The next secondary priority is when we achieve a larger number of seats in Congress, then we can spare much more resources for pressuring the ruling party to fulfill accountability. That is our weighing. We would like to hear counter standard and parameter of comparison from the other side of the house. Therefore, our arguments of focusing on winning campaign, winning election is far more important priority rather than fulfilling the accountability. That's the ways in which we understand the priority in this debate. On the second level, even if accountability is important in a later part of the campaign, why it's already fulfilled? As they have conceded, even within Jiminto, there are many factions. Even within Jiminto, Ishiba-ha, Nikai-ha, Kishida-ha have all different interests. They are eager to point out mistakes or criticize each other even within the party, or investigative journalists or independent audit analysts within the Congress and National Diet. Even within the current framework, the level of accountability is already fulfilled. We don't see a dire necessity for opposition party to spend most of their resources for pressuring the ruling party to fulfill accountability rather than focusing on getting more voter base and increasing popularity. No, thank you. Moreover, number 3, what leader of opposition and deputy leader, what prime minister and deputy prime minister explained is that too much focusing on moral attack rather undermines the ability of the party to pressure the government to fulfill accountability. Why is that? Because the voter base will walk away. That strategy will alienate voter base because it damages the ability. It damages the ability of political party to make a necessary concessions in the case of emergency. For example, when COVID-19 spread out, what happened is that立憲民主党 was always attacking Abe Seiken on the basis of Sakuraを見る会 and how many people Abe Akie-san invited to that private party. That was severely criticized by vast majority of voter base within that period of time because they should have spent more time though vaccinations or what medical care was necessary in response to COVID-19. And this was statistically proven. The 国民民主党 policy-focused party increased voter base by 2% within these 3 years. As opposed that 立憲民主党 decreased voter base. 立憲民主党 was famous for moral attack. They always attacked 桜を見る会, モリカケ and so on. They dramatically decreased the voter base within the 3 years. 令和新選組 led by 山本太郎 is also famous for moral attack. The 令和新選組 also currently is the weakest opposition party in Japan. So it is statistically proven that when you focus on too much about morality or personal attack, that will fundamentally damages. Why? The logic is people will be skeptical about the ability and capability of a party for policy making. What people value is a policy making strategy and tactics and the ability to create better policy outcome. That's people appreciate, value most. That is why this statistic is plausible. So conclusion is that the degree of accountability that OPs care about is already to some extent fulfilled within the status quo, and that's the secondary priority. The primary priority is to win the election and increase the vote base. I would like to get a point from any of you.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
do you think Japan has good corruption accountability with parties like Kokumin Minshito rising in version of this?
Yeah, I'm so happy to live in this country, yes. Second level, the efficacy of policy-focused strategy for increasing voter base. Two important mechanisms to which we have absolutely no attention. First of all, under policy-focused strategies, we can approach wider range of voter base because vast majority of voters are floating voters. They do not have strong ideological preference. So example is someone is socially conservative but economically liberal. For example, I oppose abortion, but I prefer less taxation and deregulation in market. The vast majority of people are like these characters. Therefore, implication is that vast majority of voters choose party on the basis of issue by issue, rather than ideological preferences. On the second level, allocation of limited resource within the party. What happened on our side of the house is that we are able to spare resources for research and analysis on how subsidy impacts birth rate or acceptance of immigrants will eventually improve GDP rates, or to what extent a printing new bill will impact inflation. We are able to spare resources for calculating those mechanisms or simulation of economic policy. On their side of the house, we have to spare resources for investigating extramarital affairs. What kind of trips that Nikai-san did, or how many shoseki or books that Nikai-san bought. These are the kind of stuff that you have to spare resources for. So which is better on balance? On our side of the house, voters are able to access wider range of discourse, information, hence are able to make informed decisions about democracy. Therefore, this has preferred such a world. Moreover, number 3, what about uneducated, poor, least well off? For those people, the employment policies, livelihood protections, or medical care directly influence their lives. So information about how much money that you can get from the next month, and those are the kind of information that these people need most of all. We are able to directly deliver this statistic analysis to those fundamental demography of individuals on our side of the house, and that's the tactics of Kokumin Minshito is doing on Twitter and YouTube. The Tamaki-san is directly citing the actual number of their calculation in order to incorporate those voter bases from the least well-off in our society. Therefore, our strategy is much better, which is mutually exclusive, and that we are happy to propose. Thank you.
I think there is a large difference in the premise of these two sides, right? I think the government side thinks that opposition parties can make it into the government and can make actual changes on their side. And then we think that opposition parties literally won't be able to get in, and even if they did get in, there won't be much, they don't have much influence. So I'm going to prove that which one is actually correct. We think that opposition parties literally won't get in, as Elo explained, to that extent that they think they will. And I think that even if you focus on specific policies, I think there's a small chance that the number of opposition parties will increase on their side of the world. We think this is because 3 reasons. Firstly, I think that people are already happy in the status quo. I think if you're in functioning democracy, I think people are really people have pretty like same like similar like ways of thinking, and I think that if you prefer like similar policies. But secondly, I think DPM proved to us that dominant parties will stay dominant because they have more funding, because they have more of that propaganda, right? And I think that if you have that, I think dominant parties will stay dominant. There's no way to flip that. Yes.
Yeah, we're not talking about let's become the majority party. We're talking about let's get more seat in the Congress. We're talking about let's actually voice out our opinions so we get actual more political discourse in the sphere. It's not a win-loss game.
So I think I'm just gonna go back to my argument. I think that thirdly, we think that because they talked about there's these floaters will go in and vote for these opposition parties, right? But we think that this is not going to happen on their side because floaters are floaters for a reason. I think that they go along with the majority. They are influenced by collective action, and I think for those reasons they're going to be supporting the dominant party even on their side of the world, right? Rather, we think that on opposition side we better get we are better bringing in these floaters or these supporters because parties on our side will receive more attention because of their attacks on dominant parties, right? Because these media cares about these dominant parties and them being attacked, and I think that Reiwa新組was taken up by TV than any other dominant party. I think that these kind of attention will be brought onto opposition opposing parties. They will have more say in what they want to do. So the implication here is that the only thing that opposition parties can effectively do to actually hold accountability is that point fingers at the dominant party. And I think that if these opposition parties were able to get into parliament, I think they will continue doing so. They will continue pointing the fingers at the dominant party. I think that they will be more effective in doing that, right?
Point.
Yes.
Do you believe that Japan or America is a functional democracy as defined by the motion?
Yes, we think that. We think it is a functional democracy, but we think that and even in those cases, opposition parties are still voted in. But I think that these people still point even in their elections they already do point fingers at the dominant party. I think that the opposition parties in Japan and in America also do what is called the moral character, attack on moral character. So then. Now I want to move on to attacking their first point, right? Firstly, they talked about how they're going to expand the influence of the opposition party. But I already explained to you that we don't think that there really is a need for that, or we also think that we achieve that better on our side. But secondly, they talked about how opposition parties will use bad strategies and that they will only focus on moral campaigning, right? Firstly, we think this is not true. I think you still need some kind of policies to actually win a political campaign. You still have posters for people to see your policies. I think the delta between for opposition parties in this debate then is that when you're doing a political speech in front of the station, you're going to use half of that speech time into criticizing the dominant party. I think that is what these dominant parties are doing, opposition parties are doing. But secondly, I think opposition parties will bring up their side, right? I think for first speaker told you that they're going to try to differentiate from other opposition parties or other dominant parties. I think that these parties will try to if they're going to point out the flaws in the dominant party, they're going to try to bring up their side and say, oh, we do it better. I think we don't do this. But thirdly, even if this was true, I think that pointing out that a politician is racist is still important, right? I think this is not irrelevant. I think voters will still care to some extent if these voters are actually influenced by these kind of more attacks on moral character. I think that these people don't want to vote for these voters. They're going to choose other politicians, and I think that goes better along with the interest of the voters. But thirdly, they talked about how there's going to be a loss of good politicians and there's going to be focus on attack on characters, right? But firstly, I think I first said this is going to be symmetric. If you actually go against abortion, I think people will still be unwilling to support you either way. But secondly, I think that immoral criticism will face backlash. I think immoral criticism as in saying that if you're going to lie about someone doing something, or if you're going to say that someone if you're going to make someone seem like a villain, I think that if you go too far, there's going to be backlash. I think if you're a dominant party and you're being attacked, you're probably going to go against that backlash if it's so wrong to the extent that people will leave you. And I think that that because these opposition parties don't want that backlash, they won't go to the extent that they're going to lie. Yes.
Your entire claim is that opposition parties can never even bite into what the primary party's monopoly on power is. How then will opposition parties have any accountability measures on your world?
I think that our side is that, there's going to be what I was trying to say is that not that zero opposition parties are going to win. I think that the number of opposition parties on both sides are going to stay the same. And in that opposition, in that same number, I think that our side will be more accountable because even we're going to start pointing fingers at the dominant party even through, from the start of the campaign. And thirdly, I think that, now I want to move on to which side achieves better accountability. I think that government said that accountability would exist, within the party of fractions, and I think we say that the difference between opposition parties holding accountability and people inside the dominant party doing it is because the people inside the dominant parties won't attack the people in the same party because if these people lose votes, you're also going to lose votes. I think that you're only going to attack other parties if it's about moral characters, right? But secondly, I think to seek accountability, they talked about how in order to seek accountability, you need to get a voter base. But we proved to you that this is probably going to be the same on both sides of the world, right? So because we were able to prove to you that we have the same amount of opposition numbers, but we achieve better accountability by focusing on what opposition parties can actually do. So proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. Load the opposition case, opposition requires
Okay. I think it says a lot that in a functioning democracy, when you have the right to speech, you have the right to retain information, that there is a very dominant party. That says a lot, right? That says a lot about the party in itself, insofar as people actively choose to opt into that party historically again and again and again, right? We think that your family is voting for it. So, well, even if the current population is not that invested or are floaters, we think that because your family is voting for it, because your entire ancestry has voted for it, you will vote for it, and this cycle goes on again and again, and it doesn't stop because the majority party has good policies for you, right? If you're on the brink of starvation, if everyone was on the brink of poverty, of course they would kick that majority party out. We think that on their side they have just simply mischaracterized this majority party and the majority of the voters so proud to oppose. With that, let me go into my two clash points for today. Firstly, which side has more accountability, right? Let me clarify that this debate is not about which side is better for these opposition parties. This debate is about which side is better for politics in general, and in general, for which side is better for accountability. So, government side, their best case, or their whole case, was that the opposition party can increase votes, so they'll be able to have more accountability, or they'll be able to ensure more accountability, right? But my whip speaker already told you that this is very not likely because of stuff like collective action. People think that everyone else is voting for this party, and because they do not really have strong political ideals, they'll vote for that dominant party as well. Secondly, we think that this dominant party already has very good policies, so people are satisfied with the status quo, they'll not vote for the opposition party. So you think that rather on our side, we think that the opposition party is wasting resources at the point in which they're wasting resources on doing policies they'll not even get passed in parliament, they'll not even get passed in the government. That is a waste of resources for the opposition party, right? So you think that the only thing that opposition parties can do on our side of the house is ensure accountability, right? And we are able to do that. And we think that on that side, even in the best case, even if opposition parties are able to get into parliament, we think that they they lose the incentive to ensure accountability of the dominant party. Why is this so? We think that this is because they do have stuff to lose now. Taking words from their second speaker, they have stuff to lose, so they will not be likely to openly criticize the people that they're actively making policies with, or the people that listen to them on a daily basis. So with that, accountability is not ensured on their side. Rather, on opposition side, how is it ensured, right? We say that it is ensured because people have, even if the people who are speaking up about it are very small, humans have this human nature to actually value morals, right? From the day you are born, you're ingrained with morals. And we think that especially since people are a sucker for scandalous things, we think that even if it's only a small amount of people who are saying scandalous stuff about the dominant party, that is likely to gain a lot of traction on social media. So we think that accountability is much more ensured on our side, right? And we think, and they talked about how we'll have over accountability, how we'll be attacking people about racism and stuff like that, right? But let me point that, why is that so bad, right? We think that having racist people in parliament is such a really bad thing, at the point in which minorities are going to be oppressed. We do not really see why its over accountability is so bad if it's going to affect the quality of policies much worse on our side. Secondly, how are we able to ensure better policies and better democracy on our side, right? We already told you from our second speaker that because there'll be discourse within the dominant party, because the dominant party have an incentive to actually still retain their voter base, they will actually be able to ensure better policies to some extent, and they're already doing so in the status quo. For all these reasons, we are so proud to propose on the margin that we are able to actually bring out the uniquenesses of what only the opposition party can do in these democracies.
Thank you for that speech. To conclude this debate, government reply.
Three, two, one. Much like my favorite shoe, opposition flip-flops a lot. They don't agree on what a functional democracy looks like. They can't agree between their speakers whether opposition polities have higher power in their role. They can't agree if the primary party is a good actor. I'm going to clarify everything from my reply speech. But before it clashes, let's clarify one thing. On opposition's magical silver bullet, a functional democracy. There's two contradictory claims here. Hikaru says, oh, equal funding. Oh, everybody gets a chance. We like this scenario. This means that opposition parties have power. This means our side gets as much accountability as their role. This means that our side gets better policy. But let's be realistic. It's probably not the scenario we're debating, so let's disregard what Hikaru says. Here's Haruka's characterization. Haruka says, in response to my POI, well, Japan is a functional democracy, and the US is a functional democracy, which means Hikaru's thing falls out the window. It's not equal funding, it's not equal opportunity, but that does mean that opposition parties have some power. This means that their entire silver bullet on functional democracies in response to the faults of a primary party entirely falls out of the debate. Two clashes then. Individual accountability, then power to the opposition party. Individual accountability. We give you a couple important things from Mitsushi's speech. We tell you that the premise for accountability exists in election success, and that internal checks and balances systems are likely adequate enough to get as much accountability as them, especially because we have things like investigative journalism, which has incentive to sensationalize in both worlds. Disregard all of this. The most important thing is that we engage to the best case. The best case on opposition is a world in which they can attract all the gossip lovers. This is unsustainable for two reasons. Number one, there is no material change in policy. But secondly, and more importantly, the moment in which the leader changes from Trump to Ron DeSantis, that is at the point in which everything, all the sensationalization, all the you suck narrative that they created falls out the window. It's just not a sustainable method for an opposition party.
Here.
With that said, second clash, power to the opposition party. Three sub-clashes. Firstly, why is power to the opposition party important? The simple reason why is because the dominant party is not 100% correct. That policy and decisions are not black and white. It is a democratic process where individuals must obtain discourse. We give you a couple of reasons why it is likely that the dominant party is not necessarily the one party that has all the good policies. We give you things like money, gerrymandering, propaganda, ingrained beliefs. Look at opposition replies rhetoric. Your family votes for it. That proves that these people aren't making decisions based off of good political decisions. They're making decisions based off of other factors like societal coercion. On our side, what we get is discourse that acts as a counter-narrative to this. Second subclass then. Is individual morally charged antagonism a bad strategy? We say yes. We give you three reasons. We say, one, that it leads to a lot of the informed voters opting out of your party. Secondly, it leads to a lack of resources. They're spending millions on trying to find shady things about Trump. We spend millions on actually getting healthcare to individuals. And number three, this disregards good ideas made by bad actors. No lack of engagement here. We give you all of this. Very little engagement from their side. I don't think that this really is much of a contention. Third subclass. On the flip then, is policy debate and actual things like policy related debate and campaignment important and good for a political party's success? We give you again 3 reasons why. I'm not going to go over it. I'm sure you took a good flow. Here's a crucial note here. Let's assume our very, very worst case scenario. At worst, the opposition party never becomes the majority. That's what their claim is. Although this is factually wrong, we see examples in Japan in 2008, it became the Jiminto to the Mitsushi. We see US every single year, Democrats, Republicans change. It's not true the opposition parties can't fight back. But far more importantly, at our very worst, there's 3 reasons why we still win. Number 1, it is not a win-loss matter. It is not black and white. Obtaining more seats leads to more power in the Congress. You oftentimes need 2/3 of the votes to pass things. That means that having a strong opposition party there can lead as a massive accountability factor. Number 2, leads to more societal discourse. And number 3, this leads to better voter-informed decisions. At the end of the day, their rhetoric is opposition party can never win. Therefore, let's just talk shit about our enemy. That's their entire strategy. On our side, the fact is bipartisan policy exists. Voters changed, and that's the only way we can strengthen a democracy. Propose.
Okay, thank you for that speech. I thank all debaters for a wonderful round. We will proceed with the deliberations.